Thank you for the invitation, Hugh. So I have the distinct honor and challenge of addressing all of you right after lunch. So maybe we'll keep this a little bit interactive. Thank you, to the organizers for creating this opportunity for us. Maybe before we get into this, and am I audible? Is this better? Great. So maybe before we get into a lot of research and numbers and data from BCG, if we can start with a little bit of a show of hands. How many of you worry about, employee motivation or retention in your companies? Really? That's all? Okay. How many of your companies are actively looking for how to better tailor products and services sharply to the right target audience? Yes? Okay, great. Then I think we will all find as we go through this that DEI is actually a really valuable tool. Am I audible still? Okay. What we'll find is that DEI is a valuable tool for all of you to drive these very core business objectives within your companies and actually elevate this to a strategic level. So quickly, why should we as a group think about DEI? There's actually 3 pillars as BCG thinks about it, right? We think about inclusive organizations, which is within the walls of the company. We think about inclusive products and services, which is really about what you're taking out to market. And the third we think about is inclusive partners and ecosystem, right? What is your entire supply chain and vendor base? Our research globally has shown that 40% of people are likely to quit, or 1.4x people are more likely to quit if they witness discrimination, right? I'm not saying experience discrimination. I'm saying witness discrimination, right? Which is a very important point to think about. The other one is our research shows that people are 20 to 30% more likely to be happy and motivated if a company is prioritizing DEI and running a core DEI agenda. Right? The other things, as you all think about products and services, look, I mean, we can joke about this, but truly women do impact decision making and spend in households over 50% of decisions, right? And this is not just related to what happens in the kitchen, but what kind of vehicle should we buy, what kind of mutual funds should we invest in. These types of decisions are also influenced by women in households. If you look at, perhaps the LGBT community representing about 6 to 8% of population, that represents 100 million individuals in the country. Disability, which is underreported by Indian government metrics, disability, whether partial or more impactful, impacts 160 million individuals. I myself have a bit of a motor disability. So it impacts 160 million individuals, and anybody who has anybody with a disability or even a chronic illness in your family, that it impacts not just that individual, but the entire ecosystem and 3-4 more people around them, right? And so how you engage as a family with the world around you really depends on the needs of individuals within your family. And finally, as we found, when you have a more diverse supply chain, you have a more robust and resilient supply chain, and that truly adds value. So if any of you had any questions about how do you make the case for DEI in the boardrooms as you go back to your organizations, these are compelling research-backed points. We don't try to say, hey, look, a company does better if there are women in leadership, etc. Right? The correlation causation there is too hard to establish, which is why going right down to the employee level and thinking about attrition, motivation are truly the most important ways to think about DEI. Now, when you think about where companies are in their journey, this is a bit of a simplification, but essentially you have people who are looking inside the 4 walls only at inclusive organization, and then companies that have gone out to actually give product services to the market that are tailored to a more diverse audience, right? And some companies can take more tactical steps, others have truly embedded DEI and inclusion in their thinking in terms of leadership priorities and KPIs, in terms of budgets that they have allocated, and in terms of dedicated professionals. So there is a bit of a spectrum in terms of organizations and how they are actually embedding DEI. The other thing, and I'm sure all of you would have experienced this, and through our now dozens and dozens of interviews, what we found is that typically organizations tend to pick one dimension of diversity, right? Whether it's women, whether it is disability, they tend to start with one dimension of diversity and then organically build that out and cement it into a more broad DEI agenda that takes into account more dimensions. Candidly, between all of us, there are 3 safe dimensions that a lot of people think about, which is, women, LGBT, and disability. In our country, there are many more dimensions to be thinking about, whether it be religion, language, caste. So as a group here, I think, it's over the next decade, it is incumbent on us to actually think about expanding what we mean by inclusion. We undertook some research recently in the past year and a half with ET Edge, which we were able to actually interview and survey a number of organizations. And if you think about the bucketing of organizations, while there is, yes, many of us are early in our journey in terms of being beginners or initiators, there are organizations that are pushing on multiple fronts, that have started to think about DEI as a competitive advantage, that can truly serve as role models for us, and we'll come to some of that through the course of this. So through this survey, we actually had organizations answer questions about the 5 key dimensions. There was organizational commitment, leadership, and then how they thought about it in terms of talent, product, services, and then vendors. Pretty vast gap in terms of how people had adopted various practices. The best organizations in terms of organizational strategy actually had dedicated resources, right? And they actually had a budget and kind of, for lack of a better word, money where their mouth is, right? In terms of putting effort and organizational bandwidth into thinking about inclusion as a strategy. Leadership commitment is an important one. If any of you have worked, you will know the people within your organization who actually have passion for the topic and those who are still coming along and learning about the topic, right? And you can mentally distinguish between those people. The idea, and one that we also are working on a lot within BCG, is how to broad base that, right? So not just have people who are passionate about DEI be involved in it, but also actually engage people who are at senior levels to truly be allies and truly feel the empathy and be able to communicate inclusion in their day-to-day, not just for the purpose of meeting metrics or KPIs, right? And what you see at the more advanced organizations is that, of course, they have the metrics and KPIs, but they have training, they have sensitization, they actually have workshops with senior leadership to actually engage them much more deeply. From a talent realization perspective, I think all of us, most organizations have kind of the structure in place, what we call the policy process, kind of the left brain, logistics of it taken care of, right? Like we all meet the requirements that are required in terms of, safety for women, in terms of, ramps in and out of stores, etc. Truly changing the DNA of an organization, thinking about things like pronouns, are men actually taking leave to take care of children? Those are the types of more cultural things rather than just structural things that are distinguishing organizations that are leading in this space. In terms of market access, I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but for example, text messaging was actually created for people who had auditory issues. The electric toothbrushes that you use were originally created for people who had motor issues. Fidget spinners, if anybody's heard of them, you should raise your hand now. Fidget spinners were actually created, for people who have ADHD, and now, have become so broad-based. Market access is where companies are truly thinking about how to tailor their products, and many of them, especially in the financial services sector, are truly moving towards tailoring products and services for a wider audience. There are some intuitive tailoring that you would anyway imagine. For example, there are some two-wheelers that naturally are perhaps preferred by women versus men, but we're not talking only about kind of physical characteristics being different, right? It's about, do you actually have the opportunity to select your own pronoun, whether it is he, she, they, or Z, whether you have that opportunity to select your own pronoun and the gender of your significant other when you're opening a bank account, right? It goes deep when you think about products and services. And finally, there are organizations that really ask questions of their vendors in terms of whether they themselves are inclusive, and that is quite a distinguishing factor. What we found that was interesting, and this is amongst the organizations that we surveyed, and I think many of us here will know that women's labor force participation in India is low, right? Women, of course, are slightly underrepresented, also underrepresented at leadership positions, but if you look at other dimensions, such as LGBT as well as persons with disability, those are massively underrepresented relative to general population, right? And so it is time that we actually think about broad-basing DEI. There are things that organizations have done to really drive, for example, the Pride agenda. We at BCG have a confidential affiliation program. Many of the other consulting firms also have the same. So there are ways to do this even in more complicated situations. Yeah, I'll just skip through this. Given we have a little bit of limited time. So I'll take a couple of examples here of, one is lemon tree hotels and the other is Lalit hotels. Hospitality, because we are talking about a frontline staff, which I thought might resonate with this group. Lemon Tree is really, really leveraging persons with disability, right? Physical as well as neurodiversity. They actually have done a very detailed job mapping and actually go out and recruit persons with disability for roles where they can be more effective, right? And that does not include, just to be clear, it does not include only roles that are in the back office, right? It's not only cleaning staff or only, housekeeping staff. Lemon Tree Hotels has greeters in lobbies, right, who are also persons with disabilities. So really truly thinking about how to embed this, and they have benefited from this from the perspective that they have lower rates of attrition, right? They're the only hotel that offers this. Other hotels are not going to offer this. So therefore they do have lower rates of attrition for their PWD employees. And they also have, the ability, it's something unique that their consumers actually connect with and engage with and appreciate about the company. How they've done this, similar to what we talked about. One, of course, they have leadership vision. They have dedicated resources, clear communication. They don't hide this fact, right? It's very open, both to internally as well as to their consumers, that this is a priority for us, right? Job mapping, which really is the grunt work that needs to be done to make things work on the ground, to really match up people who have a certain type of disability with a job that can still take advantage and help them live up to their potential in other ways. Many of you, if you are thinking about inclusion, may have experienced difficulty hiring people who are from these various communities, and I see some people nodding here. There are actually NGOs and partner organizations, right, that can help you actually tap into the right talent pools. And finally, they didn't do this all at once. There was a journey to getting there. They tried, they tested, they refined, they iterated, right? And so that commitment and sticking to it and going from small to big has really held them in good stead. Quick numbers, they actually have lower attrition, 50% lower attrition, which is not trivial. They actually do have an increase in operational efficiency. It just so happens that, employees, there aren't that many options available, right, for PWD. And so there is commitment, there is, a lot of focus in what they're doing. And it is not just employees who are part of the community that are happier at Lemon Tree. Actually, the other employees also report being more engaged and more happy because they're being included in what they see is a bigger cause than just themselves at the company. Many of you may have heard of the Lalit Hotel's commitment to LGBT diversity. They, through all of their hotels, you will see something different. You will see, for example, pronouns are not just, you don't just have a women's room and a men's room at a Lalit hotel. You actually have gender neutral washrooms at a Lalit hotel. You don't get greeted only as Mr. or Mrs. You get asked how you want to be greeted. There is a pride flag when you go in, right? Now, I do think that the hotel can take more advantage of this positioning, but just as a result of their association with this, Yes, gay marriage is not legal in India, but there are commitment ceremonies. There are, couples who really truly want to celebrate their togetherness. And where do they go to, which hotel do they pick when they actually want to do this? They go to the Lalit hotels if they can actually afford it, right? They also have, a nightclub, a really vibrant social community around the Lalit hotels, which has yielded them, real monetary benefits over time. Now, they didn't do it with that intent, but they have actually, through their positioning, ended up with some monetary benefits as well, according to this. So I guess my time's up, but just really quickly to recap, you will all be at different parts of your journey. But if you're here, you're passionate about the topic and care about driving this within the organization, there are 7 things that we think are important. All of these look very easy and nice on paper. They're all very hard to do on the ground, so we should stay in touch. The first is just that leadership commitment and having a senior sponsor who is driving this, right? This cannot be just an HR initiative. It has to be something that heads with P&L responsibility need to be involved in and really believe in. The second is the role of allies. At the end of the day, while you don't want allies to speak over or, overpower the voice of members of a community, why are members of a community in the state that they are? It is because they are a minority. Power does not lie, in the more diverse communities. And so it's really important to harness the power that is sitting with the broader organization and allies to truly drive the agenda. Third is, look, we all know KPIs, KRAs is what really moves things in an organization, and what is measured gets done to some extent. So to the extent that that is required, we think it is quite critical to embed in, understanding and measuring the performance of the organization. The fourth is an interesting one, which is, don't leave this to structure only. It has to get embedded into culture. Excuse me. Culture to the extent of how people introduce themselves. Do we have, more inclusive presentations in the organization? It has to involve the 1,000 touch points that every individual has through the course of their day at work. There is contextualization. What works in, of course, there's contextualization by different dimensions of diversity, whether it be gender, pride, etc., etc. But actually what works in perhaps Karnataka may not work in Bihar. Right? What works in a manufacturing setup may not work in a retail setup. And so really thinking about the nuts and bolts of how to make something happen, given the context, is critical for us. Appreciating people through recognition of efforts, because this requires a broad-based effort, not just leaders, not everybody, but appreciating the individual regardless of hierarchy or where they sit, for actually demonstrating inclusive behavior is an important element that we think of driving this. And finally, leverage the ecosystem. You're all here. The ecosystem is rich, and so this is a really important part of what you all can do. I think with that we conclude. Thank you so much, and I hope this has given you some food for thought.